lost city of Ngoro turned out to be a major disappointment for the community. Players have called it one of the worst expansions in history. The long-awaited balance patch was supposed to fix numerous problems, and in this video I plan to update the list of top decks and deliver a final verdict on the new expansion.
Time to rock and roll!
Hello my friends. My name is Bot Mathematician and this is Holomancer.
Also, Chief Investigative Reporter Dora joined us this evening.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop. Guys, forgive me, but I can't resist reminding our viewers about your shame. When nearly the entire community had reached a consensus that the new expansion was a huge failure and that the developers had lost control of the situation, you two kept insisting that the balance patch would fix everything, and that it had been created even before the expansion's release but deliberately delayed to shake up the meta. By your logic, only now can we see the developers' true plan, and if this was the intended state all along, then it's something worse than just a failure. There's only one thing I can't understand. How can mathematicians be so naive?
Dora, we admit defeat. It's only fair to acknowledge that you were right when you said the new quests didn't stand a chance under current conditions.
As an excuse, I can only say that we expected a much more radical balance patch, not these minor tweaks. Many quests did receive buffs, but it didn't help, and couldn't help, without drastic changes to standard. To better understand what's happening now, I suggest we first briefly discuss the consequences of the patch and look at the best decks for climbing to legend, and only then deliver our verdict on the expansion.
Guys, let me begin. In the first 24 hours after the nerfs and buffs, it felt like the new strategies had become more viable. Players briefly returned to experimenting, and the meta started to feel alive again. One dominant leader quickly emerged, Protoss Priest. Its popularity reached nearly a quarter of the entire meta, which naturally couldn't go unnoticed. The experimentation phase was cut short once more, and players went back to time-tested strategies. As for Death Knight, players have mostly lost interest in the class. It's competitive, but it doesn't deliver impressive results. The Menagerie strategy still exists in the meta, but its effectiveness dropped after the nerf. The Starship build, focused on 3 blood runes, remains the more stable option. It's more of an experimental list trying to make use of the new card High Cultist Herenn. Its role is to summon Starship parts from the deck, and surprisingly, it does a decent job at this mundane task. The other new card is Elise the Navigator. This is one of the few cards that has proven its worth and is definitely craft-worthy. When considering whether to craft this deck, keep in mind its cost. 5 legendaries and 5 epics. That's very expensive for a casual player. Its win rate sits at 55% based on over 1,000 games between Diamond 5 and Legend. Given its cost and performance, its efficiency factor is only 25%. This means that if your resources are limited and you don't already own the key cards, this deck should be a low priority to craft. In addition, the meta has seen the rise of new standalone Herenn interactions. The archetype is still in an active testing phase but looks at least viable. The main idea is to abuse the death rattle effects of just 2 high-cost minions and then repeat their effects with Umbra. If you have the necessary pieces, you can join the testing, but keep in mind that due to low popularity, the win rate data isn't very representative.
Demon Hunter overall is in a much better place than Death Knight, but players still mostly ignore it. The aggro archetype remains one of the deadliest, while being incredibly cheap to build. In this case, its cost-to-performance ratio yields an impressive 95%. This is still a crucial deck for players with limited resources who want to push to Legend.
But the real surprise is the return of Armor Demon Hunter. A slight power dip brought back strategies that had already caused problems in the past. The deck has gone through a noticeable transformation, although it still revolves around abusing Arcanite Defense Crystal. This allows players to quickly create a lethal starship and then repeatedly bring it back to life, including with the Rest in Peace spell. The deck can offer you several hours of interesting gameplay. At a certain point, you gain such a massive advantage that it becomes nearly impossible for your opponent to deal with, which for some players can be fun. At the same time, you wouldn't want to run into an opponent playing it. The toxicity level of this deck is off the charts, and that perfectly sums up the current meta. As for Druid, it's competitive and represented by multiple strategies, but it just doesn't spark much interest among players. After the severe blow to the Loki archetype, it completely disappeared from the meta, at least for now. This cleared the way for a spell damage strategy. Overall, the archetype hasn't undergone any significant reinvention, and the new cards had minimal impact. This OTK deck is quite effective but very expensive. Moreover, keep in mind that over the long run, this strategy rarely manages to stay in the meta for very long.
Hunter is overall in a good spot. Hand buff Hunter remains very effective but, fortunately, has only local popularity on the climb to legend. The deck fully aligns with the current trend of abusing the effects of key cards. The new leader within the class, and arguably the entire meta, is Beast Hunter. This is a highly aggressive deck that can easily flood the board again and again. It has effectively adapted the new cards, gaining even more strength as a result. Its biggest advantage is its extremely low cost. It requires only 4 epic cards. Considering its high performance at higher ranks, the efficiency factor algorithm starts to break down, showing an absurd efficiency level of 109%. This is an outlier. In theory, we simply shouldn't have decks that are this strong while being this cheap.
Speaking of Mage, it's worth mentioning that spell-based quest strategies briefly returned to the meta after the balance patch, but couldn't adapt to the rapidly changing conditions and quickly lost effectiveness. The new elemental mage shows some signs of life but remains extremely niche. Overall, the class is falling back on abusing the Protoss archetype.
This archetype has long been a ticking time bomb, and sooner or later the moment had to come when it would start preying on slower decks. The deck isn't stable because the influence of aggro decks keeps growing, and there are still enough slower decks that can increase their life total. For this reason, the overall win rate, in most cases, will directly depend on the decks your opponents choose. Still, the deck remains dangerous for slower strategies without a strong, clear win condition. Nothing particularly interesting is happening with Paladin. The class is trying to revive the Linessa OTK strategy, which has had moderate success. Drunk Paladin is also decent, but players still mostly prefer the quest archetype despite the noticeable hit it took from the nerf. The deck's effectiveness dropped, but it remains competitive. Decks without a strong win condition still struggle to deal with an endless wave of Murlocs. On top of that, a new aggro Paladin is rapidly gaining popularity. The archetype is extremely effective and still flies under the radar. The absence of a quest allows it to immediately establish board presence, which is a major advantage.
Priest is represented in the meta by 3 strategies. Menagerie and Wilded remain competitive even after a painful nerf. But the title of the class's most popular archetype still belongs to the Protoss strategy. The meta has adapted to its dominance, and the archetype is slowly losing effectiveness, and with it, popularity. Overall, I like this strategy and see it as one of the healthiest in the current meta, but it only became so prominent because of the absurd Resuscitate spell, which once again allows players to abuse specific minions for maximum value. This has added a toxic element to the deck. Rogue hasn't been able to make the new playstyles work effectively and has therefore fallen back on its old ones. The class is also experimenting with Protoss synergy, but the cycle strategy remains far more promising. Logically, one might assume that the new quest, which got buffed, would become a core part of this strategy, but in practice, you really don't need it. It works like a fifth wheel. The deck overall confirms the meta trend of abusing specific minions and has extremely low interactivity. Its influence and effectiveness continue to grow.
Next up should be Shaman, but the class is basically dead. While Rogue is at least showing some signs of life at higher ranks, Shaman is almost non-existent. The buff didn't help the quest archetype become more effective, and the nerf to Murmur killed off what little was still working, although that was based on toxic interactions anyway.
Warlock, on the other hand, got much luckier. After the balance patch, the quest strategy became an important part of the meta and regained competitiveness. It's not the best strategy, but it works and is budget-friendly enough to be worth trying. Most importantly, the deck offers players a fresh gameplay experience, which really matters given the lack of new ways to play. The buff affected not just the quest's completion condition but also the reward's activation cost. All of this combined allowed players to focus on activating Underfall Rift as quickly as possible and generating endless value by summoning demonic beasts. However, because of the randomness factor, this win condition isn't that stable, and compared to more explosive combos, the archetype is gradually losing ground. In addition, the new meta has revealed Dorian Warlock as another discovery. This is a combo deck whose main goal is to find just 2 cards by turn 6. Puppet Master Dorian and the spell Cursed Catacombs, which lets you discover Agamoggan from your deck. Dorian automatically creates a 1-cost copy of it, and by playing card after card, you can instantly deal up to 21 damage to the opponent's hero while also filling the board with powerful minions. Once again, we have a deck built around abusing a single card, leaving the opponent with no real way to interact with it.
And finally, Warrior. Players have an inexplicable attachment to the quest archetype. Essentially, they're trying to integrate the card into the old version of Taunt Hydration Station. Even though the quest, at best, has no real impact on securing a win, you can still find competitive versions of the archetype. But there's an obvious trend toward a noticeable decline in its effectiveness. The new leader within the class and at the entire game is Mech Warrior. Once again, this is a deck built around abusing the effect of a single card, Testing Dummy, multiplied through Endbringer Umbra. It's expensive, extremely toxic, but highly effective, and that's the main reason why the deck has rapidly gained popularity and become the new meta leader.
So, it's time for conclusions. Even though the balance patch barely affected the effectiveness of quests, it played a huge role in normalizing the game environment.
The meta is in a stage of active turbulence. The variety of decks is enormous. Many strategies are competitive. You can find a playstyle to suit your taste. Overall, the patch brought Hearthstone back to its familiar baseline, and it's now perfectly clear how the developers want the game to look. Decks built around a single explosive interaction and the abuse of one or a few cards have become the core design philosophy and the new norm. What we see as a lack of deeper strategy is actually an intentional plan.
The only question is whether you accept this norm or not. The developers clearly do. If you're a casual player, this environment offers a wide palette of explosive interactions, and discovering each of them can be genuinely fun. But the more time you spend playing, the more you might start to feel worn out by this and sense the bitterness of its toxicity.
Personally, I'm not that categorical about the current state of the competitive scene. I much prefer the more classic approach to design without explosive combos, but I admit that the current style is more dynamic and gives players a lot more emotional highs. I love the old school Hearthstone and spirit, but it had plenty of flaws and was far from perfect.
Right now, the constant shifts in the meta push you to try new strategies. But the longer you play, the more that toxic aftertaste can build up, and that's a problem. Moreover, players claiming that the new expansion had no impact on the meta are greatly mistaken. Some tools significantly amplified explosive interactions and created new ways to abuse specific cards. That's probably exactly what the design team intended. So in a way, this set is actually quite successful.
If you're interested in evaluating the real value of the new packs or wondering whether it's worth continuing to buy them, let us know in the comments. If we see enough interest, we'll release a full research report on the usefulness of any packs, based on the current state of the meta.
Dear viewers, what do you think?
Are you satisfied with the current state of Standard? Do you like the idea of building decks around abusing specific cards?
Let us know your thoughts below and join the polls in your community tab. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to support our content and stay updated.
Traditionally, we want to express our boundless gratitude to our sponsors.
Dear friends, your help is invaluable. We will be grateful for any support.
Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for spending this time with us. We really hope that we will have the opportunity to get in touch in the next video.
Take care of yourself.
And never give up.
Job's done.